My name's Layth, I'm 44 years old and I've been in a wheelchair now for 4 years, following a bicycle accident that left me paralysed from the waist down. I live at home with my wife and 3 children and still enjoy playing loads of sports, including wheelchair rugby.
Hi Layth.
Hi Sue.
How great to see you again. I think a good place to start is if you could tell me a bit about who you have in your life and something about what you do together.
So I'm very blessed to have a fantastically strong woman in my life, which is my wife, and we have 3 kids together. Yes, what we enjoy doing together. We enjoy eating, drinking, and being on the beach and in the company of friends.
And so what about hobbies that you enjoy, things that are just for you?
Okay, well, so since my accident, I've taken up or set up a wheelchair rugby club. And also now, more recently, a wheelchair rugby league club. So they're things that I do, obviously, away from the family. And I've also started sort of canoeing, canoeing, kayaking, which actually, with the intention to involve my wife and the kids, they're really keen. And they've done it once with me. So as I become more capable and more confident on the water, the plans that we can all get on the water together and go to the Lake District or go in the sea together. But other hobbies just for me, I've kept on with going to the gym, keeping fit, and I've also taken up hand cycling following my accident. So there are a few things that I do that are just for me.
Yeah, and what about aspirations for your sporting endeavours? Do you fancy yourself as an Olympian one day?
So I just turned 40 when I had my accident, and the Paralympics were actually on being televised when I was in the hospital. And at that time, I think, it crossed my mind, because I've always been relatively good at sports. I did have some aspirations, and I still sometimes reflect and I'm a bit hard on myself, wondering whether maybe I should have pushed myself and tried harder. So I did try out for the paracanoe, the GB paracanoe team. The thing that actually stopped me pursuing it was the real understanding that actually, the level of training that is involved is the same as for able-bodied athletes. And me and my wife run our own business, and we had 3 very young kids at the time. And the idea of me having to move away from home and to train 5-6 days a week was a real big sacrifice that I wasn't really prepared to make at that time.
But it's an interesting thing about identity, isn't it? Because you've been a sportsman all of your life, and you would count your sporting endeavours as part of your identity, but equally your family is a much stronger pull. Absolutely.
I've played sport my whole life, and like I said, I've always been great at sports and enjoyed team sports. But the children were so young when I had my accident; they were like 3, 5, and 6, and I just wanted to be there. And I didn't want to miss out on 4 years or 3 years of being away from them. So for me, the priority was always being around my family and children, actually, and not missing any part of that for any other reasons. Yeah,
and being a dad is really important, isn't it?
It's the best thing for me. So I do feel very lucky that when I had my accident, that I had a very strong and loving wife and 3 great kids, and that allowed me, following my accident, to look at life and go, well, actually, life can still be great, and I can live a long life and enjoy raising my children and watching them grow.
Yeah, I remember one time you told me from a dad angle that you had witnessed another dad on the beach after your injury who was kicking a ball about, and that really touched a nerve for you. Do you want to discuss that a bit?
I've always been a very positive and optimistic person. So my brain just always looked at all the good things in life and all the things I still can do, rather than the things I couldn't do. And I suppose there was an element there probably of me not allowing myself to feel that sadness or the things that I couldn't do anymore by reframing and looking at just all the positives. But I do remember a time quite early on where me and my wife were having lunch over on the beach looking out, and I did see a man kicking a ball simply with his little boy. And at the time, I think I remember not allowing myself to sit with that uncomfortable feeling or that sadness. I probably wasn't comfortable with the feeling the sadness at the time. So yeah, that was a moment I remember thinking, so there's a little bit of me there that probably doesn't allow myself to necessarily always fully sit comfortably with some of the thoughts and feelings my body might be processing. I can now look back and reflect. I'm as I said, 4 years on, but even probably 3 years on, I can look back and realise that I think I was probably a little bit absent. I probably didn't recognise it as much at the time, but I was. I'd sort of let my partner wife just keep on doing the bulk of the parenting because she'd sort of found a groove. There was a period of adjustment for me, probably mentally as well. Rediscovering how I moved around the home and interacted with my surroundings again. So I would say that it probably might have been a couple of years really where I probably really didn't step back into the fold. So I did from very early on take the kids out on my own, and I wanted to almost prove my ability to be independent. So I took them out, to art galleries and day trips, and wanted to do that on my own because I saw it as a challenge, and it was what I always had done. However, I don't think I was really that present and fully supportive to my partner and wife, and in looking after them in a fair and balanced way. So what has improved is over time, and probably even more recently, through having couples counselling and listening a bit more to my wife and some of her frustrations, is that I've had to sort of step up, back and do more. So there are roles that change and things that are harder. So the things that I found hard, like stacking and unstacking the dishwasher or clearing a table, were things that I would avoid and would leave doing. I think it was a bit unfair that I'd pick and choose the jobs that I found were easier. And I did a lot less than I used to do. So, yeah, I think when it comes to the kids, I'm certainly a lot more available and involved and engaging with them than I used to be in the earlier years.
Yeah, okay. So that's great that you've made progress, and you can actually see that you've made progress. You can measure it. So what about roles? I'm thinking more about business, because I know that you had your own business, didn't you, when you were injured?
So yeah, my wife and I, we ran our own catering company, and but having had 3 young kids quite close together in age, my partner was actually around more at home, where I was always, I say at work until the kids came back from school. But following my accident, the business needed to keep going, and therefore my wife actually ended up. We almost swapped roles in a way without really neither of us wanting to. So my wife had to run the business. And it's a business that she didn't particularly feel passionate about anymore, and it's physically hard work being on your feet all day in catering, and I think given the fact that she was already doing a lot more domestically and at home, and having just got 3 young kids as well, I know that she probably felt a little bit resentful, not resentful towards me, but probably resentful towards having to do a job when really all she probably wanted to do was be with the kids, to take them to school in the morning and to pick them up from school. And, with our industry, she was having to work evenings sometimes or weekends. So I can totally understand some of her frustrations. And likewise, I am the sort of guy who would like to be out and about all the time, doing stuff. I'm a very much a doer. So for me to be at home all day, I'd get frustrated after coming back from dropping the kids off to then have to clear away the island unit and, restack the dishwasher, and because all those domestic jobs that I should have really been doing, which would be the jobs that my wife used to do, were harder. They obviously were harder for me to do again. So I fell into that trap of, sometimes leaving them, which would mean that my wife would come back from work and, some of the jobs, not that she'd set me jobs, she wouldn't do that, but some of the things that she would have done had she been at home weren't done. And I suppose that must have been frustrating for her because, she was then even more exhausted and pulled, in more directions. So yeah. I do think that the impact of the accident on our relationship has been huge because we have had to change roles. Not that I'm just not at work and she's working, but also what we're capable of doing in the house, and also the roles and responsibilities around, how the kids see us and what we do with them too.
Do you think were you prepared for that? When you came out of the spinal unit, was it ever discussed either with health professionals or with your wife about what your expectations of each other might be?
No, it wasn't actually. I don't remember or recall it being discussed as such. But then again, I suppose I didn't necessarily have any view either on what my life would look like and how it would be and how it would play out.
Yeah. So let's have a think about early expectations from a sex life point of view. I know sometimes health professionals will say, oh, surely somebody's sex life is the last thing on their mind. Was that how you felt it, how you experienced it?
Not at all, Sue. Not at all. So I just turned 40. Our 3 children were of the age where, they weren't sleeping in our bed anymore. And sex seemed to be, very much getting back to normal. And, we had a very healthy sex life just before my accident. I can reflect back now on those early days, weeks, months, being in that spinal hospital. And actually, I can probably say that I probably had a relatively unhealthy, well, it feels to me maybe it was an unhealthy view on that. So I to be able to understand and know how I could achieve an erection seemed really important. And I remember being quite pushy with with the medics there to understand, okay, so how would this work and what can I try? And I remember them sort of saying that this will all come in time, and there are drugs, there are medications, but really the best thing to do is to wait until you're back home, and you've adjusted back to life, and you're reconnecting with your wife again, and in the normal setting, the home setting. And I remember thinking or disagreeing. I sort of felt that I was around the right professionals, the people that would be the ones to guide me through that process. And I think I was pushing to try and explore ways too soon. So for me, I wanted to know quite early on, can I get an erection again? And if so, can we start? And through that rehab process, when you're at hospital, there are times near the end where you can start to go home for the day. So what I was doing was I was coming home on a Saturday and sometimes also on a Sunday, but returning back to the hospital for the evening time. There were times where I was asking my parents or my sister to have the kids for an hour or so, and with the sole intention just to sort of see whether I could experiment or take an erectile dysfunction drug to see whether it had any impact. And although that seemed important to me at the time, I don't think I really was aware that for my wife that wasn't important to her. And I also know now, having discussed it with her, retrospectively, that actually it wasn't. It felt like it wasn't important at all, and she was a little bit upset that sometimes I was asking for the children to be taken out of the home environment just for me to experiment. And it also felt probably very forced as well, because there were daytimes and the kids were being looked after by family members. And selfishly, it was with a view for me to sort of experiment. And I suspect from my partner that she might have felt a bit under pressure as well. Well, I think she did, even though I didn't necessarily feel or verbalise any pressure. As far as I was concerned, it wasn't something that there was any pressure on her, but it was more just to see whether these drugs would work for me. And if I was to go back and advise my younger self now, I would probably suggest that was the wrong time, and to have waited and probably done what the doctors were saying all along, which is to wait until things normalise and you are back home and in that right setting.
Yes, absolutely. So would you advise yourself differently when it comes to communicating with your wife about all of that?
Yes, absolutely. I think my wife, who was, as I said, incredibly supportive, and she did so much more than she ever needed to with my rehab and everything, really, and getting the house ready and looking after the kids, that she just was, she was prepared to do anything just to sort of help me, get back to my to my new self or my former self. So she never really put any real barriers up. But I have to say, I think I probably did some damage in those early days to our relationship by probably putting too much emphasis on that, and as you said, not really communicating with her enough about what was okay and what we would be trying to do, or maybe possibly not either explaining to her the importance that it felt to me. So I don't think I really got her full buy-in, and I don't think I realised, but it probably put a bit of some distance between us. And in the longer term, actually, it didn't push us apart, but it didn't necessarily welcome some more intimacy, which I think would have probably been much more appreciated by her. Really, she just wanted to reconnect again. And although I did too, I was also possibly a little bit too eager to reconnect on the physical side, rather than more just on the on the emotional side, which is more important, because the impact it had on my relationship was that our relationship was different and it had changed, and although I didn't feel necessarily different, I felt my wife was a little bit more different. It was different. Our relationship was different. So I had one-to-one therapy. And the outcome of that was actually that we would benefit from couples therapy. So fortunately, my wife was very okay with that and understood there would be some value in that. So then we went on and had some couples therapy together, which I thought was great.
Yeah, and that's really helped.
The couples therapy was fantastic, actually. I felt that during that period, we really did improve quite a lot, because with it being sort of weekly and with you sort of being set certain things to do, we were more likely to action those, or more importantly protect time to communicate effectively with each other. So I did find that the couples therapy was really helpful. They did signpost me on leaving to what they call the SARC clinic, SARC, which stands for Sex and Relationship Clinic. And I did, again, see that myself as, okay, this is a sex clinic, and this will allow me to explore different medications for achieving an erection, and also, guiding me towards how we could reconnect physically as well. And although I did encourage my wife to come along, she did come along to the first 2 sessions with that therapist. They were very much, those early ones were exploring me and what medication and how do I achieve an erection again, and in what ways. So to be fair to my wife, I think she did see this as very much for me. It was driven by me and by my needs, and the agenda was set by me, and it was about getting an erection. And I think that if we had probably be engaging with it now at a different time or a later stage, I would probably, again, through a more effective communication with my wife, look about us, as a whole, and what both our needs were, and maybe less about the outcome of just achieving an erection and the sex. There's 2 of you in a relationship, and you both have needs, and sometimes very different needs. So I think I was guided, but yet again at the time my focus was on the physical rather than the relationship.
Do you think if there had have been a sex therapist as part of the unit and available to you from early on, would you have been interested in that? Do you think that would have been useful? Absolutely.
I think so, for sure, because I probably would have had more time with that person, for them to really maybe connect with me and understand some of my needs, for them to understand what my drivers were, what my agendas, what my needs were, but also for that person potentially to have brought in my wife as well, and maybe had that one-to-one initially, as you do with the partner, to hear their side of it and what their concerns were. And I believe a good sex therapist would possibly have been able to guide me better. And I've since found out about something called Sensate Focus, which I know you'll know about, but it sounds to me that would have been a really good introduction to couples who want to reconnect and rediscover each other's bodies in a way that neither partner feels that it's gonna it leads to sex, or there has to be sex, because sex isn't the end goal of it. It's all about exploring, touch, feeling, and I think that's something that would have been really helpful to have been exposed to earlier on. And I do think that also a good sex therapist would have definitely encouraged me to have just held back a little bit more and been a bit more thoughtful on some of the things that I rushed into and rushed my wife into too early on. And I think by rushing in too early on and doing, putting too much importance on it, unfortunately that put our relationship on a sort of a back step, if you like.
Yeah, sure. Certainly sex therapy would have taken the spotlight off your genitals and put it much more onto your couple relationship.
And that's exactly what happened. That's a fair, fair assumption of what was going on for me.
A fair summary. So let's have a think, just coming to a close, about body image. How have you responded to the changes in your body since your injury?
That's a good question. I do think that I wouldn't say I've got I haven't got an unhealthy view of my body, although I don't view it in the same way, obviously. I played rugby most of my life, and I've always had really big, strong quads, and strong legs, and strong buttocks, and very muscular lower legs. And actually now they're wasted away. So I don't have a full bum, and my legs are really skinny because I'm classed as what's the word? The level of my injury means that I'm sort of classed as flaccid bowel, flaccid bladder. So there's seems to be more muscle wastage. So I don't like the idea that my upper body is still sort of big and strong, and then I've got these smaller, thinner looking legs. So I think that obviously I have got some issues, but I don't know how that manifests itself. It doesn't. It is something that I'm not in control of. There's no way of changing that. I don't try and hide it, so I'm not scared of wearing shorts in public, and I do, and I'm always getting my feet out on the beach, and so I haven't got any shame around it, but I do have a level of sadness, I think, around that my body is different. And I also know that my wife, when with my legs being thinner, I know there's been times where I've been really keen for her sort of to straddle me on the chair or sit on me. And I know that, in those early days, and sometimes even now, I think she worries about whether she can hurt me or damage me, which isn't the case. But, her perception certainly is that, I'm bigger than him and heavier than him, and his legs are thinner and more vulnerable. So that element of it bothers me because, I don't want the idea that my legs being thinner would stop my wife choosing to sit on my lap.
Yeah, sure.
Or astride or straddle me, because I want that closeness, and I think sometimes that change in our bodies is also felt by the partner.
Yes, definitely. And what about other things in terms of self-image, like for instance having a hug or holding hands? That kind of thing is different when you're constantly sat. How does that feel?
Do you know, they're really two big things for me. I'm a very tactile person, and my wife and I would hold hands a lot, and we would hug a lot, and I really miss it. And I also, so in relation to hugging, we don't hug really, in the way that we would, standing up, where your chests are against each other, and you can wrap your arms around that person and bring them in and hold it. So for my wife to hug me now, she has to she chooses to bend down, which then means that if I put my arms around her, I'm almost putting a bit of weight on her, which must feel uncomfortable for her, and also doesn't feel like the loving touch of two hearts against each other. So I miss that, and I also feel some sadness as well when I see her hugging. Even if it's a really dear, good friend of mine, I'm happy that my wife is getting a hug that I can see she's really enjoying, because we all need a hug. So I'm not envious, but I'm sad. Just that that I can't be the one that gives her that hug.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to hand holding, again, although I've got a Segway chair which allows me to move if we're going for a walk, and still have a free hand to hold my wife's hand, the fact that it's lower means that our hands will hold in a very different way. And in the early days, it felt like I was holding an adult's hand. It felt like, and for me, I was thinking, does it feel for my wife that she's holding a child's hand because our fingers didn't intertwine in the way they used to, or, the way they slipped together was different.
Yeah.
And I think for quite a long time, or felt like for years, we chose not to do that. And maybe, that was more to do with how uncomfortable it might have felt for me and how it looked. Although there are times now where I still choose to do it because I know that, this is what we would have done. And although the hand holding doesn't feel the same, it's still hand holding, it's still connection, it's an expression of what I want to be doing. But as you say, Sue, the hand holding and the cuddling are different, and they're big things. that are different and not the same, and that is sad.
Yeah. So have you found a way around any of that? Have you come up with some solutions?
Well, solutions in relation to hugging or cuddling are obviously settings like the sofa. Watching TV as a family where she can either come and sit between my legs and I can have my arms wrapped around her from behind, or to be on the sofa where she's next to me and she lies down and rests her head on me and I can put my arm, an arm around her. But obviously there are times in particular where we are both in a certain position or a place in the house. But there are times where I might feel that my wife could do with a hug. In the past I would just give her that hug. So to approach her and to give her the hug that I'd like to give her, it doesn't feel right and doesn't feel easy. And I haven't found a solution to that. And with the hand holding, I wouldn't say we found a solution to that. Although what I try and do is try and ensure that if we're sitting at a table, at a restaurant, or at the island unit, that I'll put my hand on her hand. So we're having that tactile touch with the hands, even though it's not the conventional hand holding side by side. But there is still that touch. But to be fair, really, 4 years on, I still don't think there's nearly enough hand holding and cuddling going on. And I'm sure my wife would probably agree with that too. I do think that we've still got a lot more work to do at being more tactile with each other. And I'd like for our kids to see us, because we used to hold hands and cuddle a lot more. And now that they're at their age where they're sort of paying more attention, before they were probably too young to really to notice. So I do think that there is a lot more that we can do to connect on a physical level. And obviously not on the sex, but just the hand holding, the cuddling are things that can be improved over time.
Yeah. And I suppose it's a new thing to have to ask for a cuddle, isn't it? Before you just had a cuddle, now you have to ask.
Absolutely, and I'm not very good at asking. In fact, I think my wife did actually ask for a cuddle the other day, and it took me by surprise because I feel like she hadn't really asked for them before, even though I know she needed them. But for me, it was really nice to hear her asking, and I was really happy to oblige and give her that cuddle. And what I'm not very good at is obviously asking in return at times when I probably could do with that cuddle.
Maybe that's your task for this week, Layth.
I'm sure it could be.
So I think it's fair to say, Layth, that in conclusion to our discussion, that challenging your own assumptions would be a reasonable way forward, and also to improve your communication with your partner. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. And what about any top tips that you might have, any nuggets of wisdom? What would you say to newly injured people?
Well, that's a good question. I do know that for me it was really important, and therefore even if I went back and advised my younger self to have been more patient and waited till I was out of hospital, I probably wouldn't have listened. I was being a little bit too focused and on end results and not necessarily involving her. So I would say openness and communication with your partner are vital. I also know that dealing with a sex therapist was really helpful. So I would advise anyone who is newly injured to plan that into their rehab, and where possible also involve your partner in that, and make it about actually you as the couple, the relationship as a whole. And what I've also noticed that has really grown in popularity and use over the last 4 years since I had my accident was there's a couple of Facebook groups, and in relation to specifically sort of sex and relationships, there's one called SCI Locker Room, which is for men with spinal cord injuries that share their experiences or ask questions, share information on pretty much anything. And it's just for men. And I believe there is also one for women, which is called the SCI Powder Room, which is for women to share, again, their own experiences and offer help and advice. So, yeah, the top tips are really also just, again, I'd say the importance of reconnecting with your partner, and not being so driven on the physical side. to think about really the reconnection and the emotional connection again.
Yeah, but I guess, you know, if your erection or your erectile recovery is the first thing on your mind, then of course you're naturally going to seek some kind of resolution to that problem. And I don't think that that's entirely wrong, but maybe it needs to be a bit more holistic.
Absolutely, and for me it was important, and it still would be, even if I had received that advice from my older self. So, you know, there are a lot of things out there, a lot of support out there, and it's about getting the right support. And I do think that maybe the introduction of sort of sex therapists at the hospital and part of the rehab, you know, is a really good signpost for newly injured patients.
Yeah. Well, that's been absolutely brilliant, Layth. Thanks ever so much for talking to me and for your openness and honesty. It's been brilliant. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Sue. I've really enjoyed talking to you too. I hope it can be helpful to others.